In this video, we're going to take a look at an overview of functions. So, functions are a way of grouping one or more programming statements together and then being able to call them by whatever name you call the function. So here's an example. I've defined a function I call divide values. And I've put in a colon here after a couple parentheses and one or more statements. Now in this case I've just got one statement, but I could have hundreds for that matter. When you run your script, what will happen is that this code will load first, but it won't actually run that line of code. It won't actually try to do the division. Instead, it will just save it for later. And then it'll jump down to the next statement and see if it can execute that. In this case, it could, so it'll start running that one, then the next, but when it gets down to the third one here, it will see that I've called the divide values function, and it will jump up to the first line here. Step 4 would be the place it would go. It would then go ahead and run the next statement, in which case it tries to divide two numbers. And then once it's done with that, it jumps back to where it came from and continues on to the next line. Functions are really handy for organizing your code, and you'll find them used all the time. Just about every language that you'll ever come across will have functions, including things that you would not expect would have them, such as XML. They all look a little bit different, but the pattern's pretty much the same. And that pattern is, give it some kind of name. In Python, you do so by defining it. Usually, you want to put parentheses, and then you go through and put one or more statements in here. So, I don't know, the statements could be all kinds of things. Could be like x is equal to 4, y is equal to 5, and what is the value of x and y? It'll load that code up, but it won't actually run it. If I run this, it actually processes just fine. It actually runs the code, but nothing happens. It just loads it in memory and waits for me to call it. I'll call it by going through and just putting it in by name. So this is going to run before. This is going to run after. And you can see before it runs, then it goes through and prints out the value of 9. So y there. And then after that it comes back and finishes up. And like I said, you can put hundreds of statements in here, guys. There's some things that you probably don't want to do. You probably don't want to print out a value inside of the function, but you can. Another way of using it is to return a value. If that's the case, then when the function gets called, it will go ahead and resolve into, in this case, the value of 9. It acts as an expression. Expressions are like the old days when we were doing math. You would say, okay, 4 plus 5 multiplied by 2. And teacher would say, don't solve the equation, evaluate the expression. So it would become 10, and then it would evolve into 14. You would evaluate the expression, and this would be your final evaluation. Well, that's what happens when you have a function return a value. So this is going to become, in this case, 9. And if you put a print statement in front of it, you'll see it print out the value. Because this becomes 9, evaluates into that, because 5 plus 4 is 9, and 9 gets returned. Now, we're going to be working with functions a lot more in the next chapter, but this is kind of a heads up to get you started and thinking about the use of functions. They're really quite a popular tool, and I think that once you get used to them, you'll be pretty happy to use them as well. It's very easy for a script to get 100 lines of code, hundreds of lines of code for that matter, and when they do, having ways of organizing your work really helps. Next video, we'll take a look at another organizing tool. See you there.